If you're a B2B business, a B2B tech company, or a B2B marketer, you're in the right place. Coming to you from Studio 26, this is the Interesting B2B Marketers Podcast, bringing you interesting contemporary takes, industry tips, guest interviews, and true stories from B2B marketers in the trenches. Now, here's your host, Steve Goldhaber.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. We've got a great guest on today. His name is Ethan Beute. He's the chief evangelist over at BombBomb, and he's also a Wall Street Journal best-selling author. Ethan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Steve. Really appreciate it. So glad you reached out, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
All right, give our audience a minute or two on your background and maybe how you got started in marketing.
Sure. So as everybody is, a marketer because I just found myself there at some level. I didn't set out to do it. I guess that's not the way everyone does it. But I spent about a dozen years in broadcast television running marketing inside like your local NBC or ABC or Fox station. I did that in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I did it in Chicago and out here where I am now in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And I got pretty bored of the work. So I was working on an MBA. I started doing project work with a variety of different people that I knew who needed work done to explore like, what will people pay me for? What do I actually like doing? What skills are transferable, et cetera. And I ended up doing some work with the two co-founders of BombBomb. And so I got to know them and what they were trying to do very, very early on, really even before go to market. And just really appreciated them. And at a certain point, it just made sense for me to join the team. It was a company that had almost no paying customers and almost no employees. And so it was a pretty big risk at the time, but my wife was supportive. It was the right thing to do. And here I am, a decade later. And so the most fun thing about that transition for me was the intersection of being joined at the hip with sales as a B2B marketer, because before essentially my work was in B2C, like building audience among all the people that live in a community through television. And so this idea of being joined at the hip with sales and really partnering with them to create success, as well as having very direct relationships with customers, this idea of like, I can just reach out and talk to my customers whenever I want. That was something that didn't exist for me, except perhaps through social media when I was in television. And so I really enjoy it. I love it. I have personal relationships with hundreds and hundreds of our customers. It's been a joy, and it's why I stay. I guess last thing I'll share is that for anyone who finds themselves at the intersection of fun, interesting, and challenging work, you're in a good spot. And this has continued to be that for me, which is why I continue to participate in what this organization is trying to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also started with the B2C background, and that was one of those things where you would interact maybe if you did research. Social media was not around yet when I was just starting my career, but we had a call center and, you could listen into phone calls and see what was going on. But that is a great thing about B2B is like, you're never at a lack of just someone who will talk to you about what their issues are or how they want to get better at something. So I totally agree on that. Okay. Let's jump into the storytelling part of the podcast. So the first story that you've got, I mentioned as your intro, you've written a book. We have that in common. I've written one book. I think you've surpassed me on that. Not like the number of books is any credentials to put anywhere, but we share that same process. So tell us the first story about how you got into the book.
Sure, I hit my 6-year full-time anniversary at BombBomb. And I got welled up with what I'll call a healthy pride, like pride can be bad, but I felt like this was like when I started, we all had almost no paying customers. This idea of people using video, not just in YouTube or on their website or in social, but this idea of sending video in a direct message to one person or 5 people or even 500 people was something that didn't really exist in 2011. That's why the two co-founders legally founded the company in 2006, is back when they tried to start doing this and it just didn't exist. And so we're really creating something that doesn't exist. And in 2006, after my 6-year anniversary, we were maybe at 30,000 customers or so. And some of our early phase competitors had already kind of fallen off, actually shut down or become functionally irrelevant. They weren't finding a way to make it work. And so I was just really proud of how far we had come, not just as a team and a company, but really as a broader community of people who identified that there was an opportunity to be more clear and more personal and more human in their daily communication and are like actively engage in this. We had like a super engaged customer base. And so I wrote a blog post called "You Are a Pioneer" with this vision of, one day, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of people will be doing this. It'll be as normal as typing out an email. It's like, oh, I should probably send a video here instead. That's my hope and vision. It's what is part of what continues to drive me. And so I wrote this blog post and I didn't feel like it was enough. So I just started outlining and writing it as a book to normalize this behavior. And from a B2B marketing perspective, reach people that we weren't currently reaching. Certainly, it's a referable product. Someone receives a video message, you're like, oh, that's cool. How did you do that? Right. So there's kind of inherently remarkable quality to the experience as a recipient, but we were still like, how do we reach people that we aren't reaching now? And I thought like a mainstream business book, I read a ton of them, would be a good way to do that. So I just started writing it. And then a friend of mine in publishing was like, hey, is this your book or is this a BombBomb book? I was like, I don't know. Let's talk about that.
Very blurry area, right? We all kind of go, I don't know what this is.
Yeah. So I had to build a whole business model around it. I pitched it internally. There was a lot of excitement. I identified Wiley and then Greenleaf, which is kind of a hybrid self-publisher. Wiley is a very traditional publisher. As the two preferred options, we ended up going with Wiley. They suggested I get a co-author. So that was my longtime friend and team member and our CMO here, Steve Passanelli. And it was a fantastic partnership. And it was really good for us. It ignited the group of people that we were trying to keep engaged, to keep this movement moving. But especially, we released it in spring of 2019. I still get messages consistently and regularly of people who find it, pick it up, someone gave it to them, whatever, and they want to talk about it. And from a business perspective, I know that we did at least 4 or 5 solid for us, like multi-seat deals, like good multi-seat deals that more than covered the costs of, by the way, for anyone listening, you don't make a lot of money doing a book. It really is a marketing play above all, unless you get really lucky with like an Atomic Habits or something like that just catches fire. You're generally not going to make much money on a book. And so, what we're looking for is, can we reach new people? And, we've had several people reach out and say, I saw your book at the airport as I was heading to, LA. And so I read it coast to coast in one flight and it was amazing. And so now I'm reaching out and then, that turns into a customer. And so it's been fun and interesting. And we've since done it again.
Yeah. I was reading a little bit, you had a blog post on your kind of journey on that. And we did one thing in common, is that at the beginning of the book, instead of jumping too far deep into it, you just talk to people and you say like, what'd you do it in? How long did it take? And it was funny to read the different angles of like, you had one example where someone like knocked it out in a week. Other people, like it took a long time. So it's funny how everyone's got a different journey in writing a book. And I think, to your point, a deadline is always helpful. And that's what Wiley gave to you. That's certainly there are great things about publishing partners. That's the one thing where you're kind of like, uh-oh, they're in charge of this thing
I have
now.
a contractual obligation.
Yeah.
Versus one day I'll get this finished and it's up to me to decide when that is.
Yeah. The other thing too, it's interesting about writing a book is you have people come up to you how you don't know anything about, yet they've invested, 4 or 5 hours reading the book. And they just had this like vocabulary and example set with them where like you just share all this knowledge. And it's always weird to me for people to like repeat a story to me. And I'm like, how do you know this story? I'm like, oh, it's in the book. Like it's just funny how it's, the book is the ultimate content marketing piece because, you're educating people. To your point, it is a marketing tool, right? So it's turning you into someone with a very shiny business card. And I found that it does help stand out. It's easy to throw a business card away. Someone will eventually throw your book away, but I feel like there's this obligation that for a week or two, it has to sit out. They'll have to at least acknowledge the book.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, I'll just double back on something I said off the top, and I'm sure you'll identify with it too, is that, what you can do digitally between advertising, retargeting, sponsoring other people's events and things like that, you have a reach digitally, but there's something wonderful and interesting and unique and old-fashioned about taking all of your best stories, I think I mentioned 35 or 40 different customers specifically in the book. Mm-hmm. So it really is this, it was written first person, but reflected what real people, other people were doing as well. But you put it on paper. with ink. It's just like this old fashioned physical, tangible, analog thing. And yet it's doing this reach and it's creating this experience that just isn't created digitally. Do I agree? I think it belongs in the mix for anyone who has the capacity to get that done.
Yeah. The other thing too, like I started before I did my book, I did a lot of publishing through LinkedIn. And one thing that I felt like when I was writing for LinkedIn, both, I published on my personal account and then also I was like a guest author for their own blog. But the challenge for me was like, if you're not so attention grabbing and almost salacious with headlines and lists that like you're going to lose someone's attention. And what I really enjoyed about writing a book was once someone is picking up a book to read it, I just envisioned them in a chair, like relaxing. And because of that, I felt like better content was produced because I wasn't always so concerned about specific language or keeping it like, hey, if I don't shock someone with something or tell an amazing story, they're gone in 30 seconds. So it helped me really mellow out as a writer.
Yeah, and you get to go deep in a way that, in general, to your observation, not enough people have the patience for.
Awesome. Well, I like the story. Thank you for sharing that one. We're going to jump into the second story you've got. This is a little bit more of a contemporary version of marketing or content marketing. So tell us about starting a podcast. What's it like?
Yeah, several of us here at BombBomb are avid podcast listeners. And so it seemed inevitable that we would do it. And I landed in it by doing something fun that just for fun myself, which is, I think 5 times now I've reached out to the host of a podcast I appreciate, invited myself to host them on their show as a guest. So I'll take over the host role.
Yeah,
you on your own show are now the guest. And, several people took me up on it. And so I did that with Sangram Vajre, who at the time was a co-founder and chief evangelist at Terminus. Yep. And he was kind enough to say, hey, that's a fun idea. And I proposed that we talk about his title, chief evangelist. And he was kind enough to turn that around on me and say, hey, great idea. Sounds fun. Happy to do it. But if you find 3 more, I'll run it as a 4-part series once a week for a month. So that was novel. Okay. So I knew Dan Steinman at Gainsight, who was an early team member there and a chief evangelist. He was also involved in making some introductions to me at Wiley. So shout out to Dan. Appreciate him. And cold reached out to Dave Isbitsky on LinkedIn. At the time, he was the chief evangelist of Alexa and Echo at Amazon. And I reached out with a video message and he immediately responded and said, yes. I thought that was a pretty good get for someone who's developing a project like on the fly. And then I decided I had to go for the original chief evangelist, Guy Kawasaki. He was a product. He's on a small like product evangelist team at Apple. Left over kind of like a little dispute with some decisions that were being made, and then got hired back by Steve Jobs as their first and only ever chief evangelist. So I, found a random email address on one of his multiple websites. It was something like guykawasaki@gmail.com or guy@guykawasaki.com, and sent him a video message letting him know what I was trying to do and that I would love to have him. And I was able to lean on the credibility of Sangram's show, which at that time was like 350 episodes deep, so it wasn't this kind of one-off thing. And so I didn't get a reply for like 2 weeks. But I could see because, we track the video plays and the email opens when you use BombBomb inside Gmail. And I could see the email got open like 18 or 20 times and the video got played like 12 or 14 times. So I knew something was happening, but I was kind of anxious. And I did like 1 or 2 kind of follow-ons like, hey, I just wanted to make sure you had a chance to take a look at this. I eventually got a reply back from someone in publicity at Penguin Random House. And fortunately for me, he was about to release a memoir. And so he was agreeing to do publicity. So I got him too. And so ran that as a series, ended up writing up 10 things that I learned from those 4 chief evangelists. And Steve, my CMO, who I mentioned earlier, and my boss, was like, this is awesome. Sounds like we need a chief evangelist. Sounds like you're the right person for that. And so as we started developing what we wanted to do, a podcast was just a natural thing because the podcast was the start for the conversation. We all listened to podcasts. And then the key is I knew James Carberry at Sweetfish Media, and he had written a book about content-based networking was his language for the power of what we're doing now, Steve, which is connecting and communicating on relevant topics professionally but in conversation, like at some level of depth that you don't get in a drive-by LinkedIn post, right? Someone listening to this isn't listening for 30 seconds. They want to hear real stories and get to know real people. And you and I get to know each other a little bit too. And so this idea of using a podcast in an account-based motion where you're trying to like build relationships in particular accounts, get to know your ideal customers at some level of depth. And then at the same time, you're creating a ton of content and taking some leadership position on the key themes that the podcast is based around. And so it's something I've been doing for over 3 years now. And it's been one of the most fun and rewarding things I've done in my career, period. I would hope that you've experienced the same.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, it's kind of like you're just having a cup of coffee with someone. You put more research into it and there's more production logistics, but it really just gets down to talking to people. How long did it take you on the podcast? Like, to me, I'm always in that like tech stack mode of like figuring out how to do it. And I've got an assistant who helps me produce the actual show. So I don't do nearly all the work that she does, but do you feel like you're in that constant state of just trying to figure out from the publishing side of the podcast, like, am I doing it right? Can I do it more efficiently? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, we did end up hiring Sweetfish to get some production done. So like you, I have a lot of assistance on it. But I'll share two things around that. The first is that the growth in listenership and streams and downloads, which by the way is only part of the story. It's the easiest thing to measure, but it's probably the least interesting thing about the podcast journey. I just shared recently some research that I found in Harvard Business Review and then read a couple more articles on it about the power of being in someone's earbuds, even compared to being over their speakers, in terms of affecting their thoughts, affecting their behavior, et cetera. This is a very intimate format. And so the streams and downloads matter, but it really is about sticking with it. The growth on the show that I host was about 120% from year one to year two. So when I compared it quarter to quarter and month to month, from the first year to the second year is about 120% growth overall. So doubled. The growth from year two to year three was 220%. So it grew even. So there's something about sticking with it and learning more, going deeper, constantly refining it. So gosh, I don't remember how dramatically different I was doing things on a week to week basis, say 2 or 2.5 years ago. But yes, I mean, it's every week. So the show that I host is. And so you constantly have opportunities to learn and grow and improve. I guess if I was going to offer one tip to someone who was thinking about doing this or who is early in their journey of it, because I think it is a very, very powerful thing to do for any B2B marketer, whether they host it or whether they support it internally that someone else is hosting it. I think some of the tendency is to go for, and I guess I'll double back on a story I already shared, it's to go for the Guy Kawasaki's, right? The known quantity, the guy that was at Apple, the guy that now is the chief evangelist at Canva. He's written like 12 or 14 books, a true thought leader in kind of modern marketing in general. You want to go, but he's never going to share it, right? Like I'm not going to publish the episode and he's going to put it up on his social media that has like, 100x or 1000x my following. And so it's finding this sweet spot of like real practitioners with real stories to share who are not so big that they won't share it, but not so small that they're sharing it doesn't increase the reach of the show. It's like finding the sweet spot of, people who have some real stories to share blended with, they actually have invested in, growing a voice, developing their voice, growing a community, and having some influence, because the growth of the show is very much related to your guests sharing the show.
It's interesting. We've talked about a book and a podcast, which seems completely ridiculous to even entertain that idea in this world of like short form, quick consumption. And it's almost funny. It's kind of like the zig and the zag thing. Like everyone's going to like short form content. And the stuff that I've seen is most effective is just longer form. And I think it's that old thing where it's like, even if 100 people start listening to something and 50 of them maybe bail halfway through, or, 20 end up finishing, a 45-minute episode, you've got those people for the entire time. And the relationship that you're building, whether it's in a book or a podcast, for those small people, I mean, that's hard to measure. It's kind of like someone's not going to watch a 40-minute social media post. Like there is no 40-minute social post.
Right. And so you do. And I guess that's another tip to add on. I mean, one thing I do is I cut video clips out. I shoot for, 45 seconds to 2 minutes and 15 seconds, because that's the Twitter limit of a video clip. And so, I share short pieces that do stand alone. You could spend a minute and a half with somebody and still learn something. But oh, by the way, I've got 8 other things that this person teaches, and it's all linked up right down below.
Exactly.
It is interesting that, I guess the one thing I'll share, especially if your addressable market is narrow, right? B2B marketing is pretty broad. So you could really have, like, we have a B2C motion within our business, but we also are doing, 6-figure deals as well, which on a, $400 or $500 a year product. And so, someone listening to this show may have a total addressable market of 1 million different companies. Maybe. And it's still a B2B motion, although it maybe acts like B2C at some level. Or, some of our customers there are 500 companies that they want to be in business with, and they want to be in deep. And so, those 30-second drive-by things are not that useful if your goal is to get to the VP or SVP or the C-suite level inside one of 500 companies. And if you can get inside 2 of them as a salesperson or a marketer within, a 6-month period, you're doing great and you're providing massive value to the organization. And so, don't fall into the trap of like the hack and the best practice or whatever. Do things of substance in order to serve the people you're trying to be in relationship with, and trust that it's going to work out. Pay attention to what's working and what isn't, of course, but I really appreciate your observation about depth. And I'll just share last thing. I saw a piece published pretty recently about, is a broad survey of like 500 executives. I think it included VP and above, and what they were looking for in thought leadership and in content marketing. And the key word that I took out of reading this like 4-page report was provocative. They want their assumptions provoked. They want to think differently about what's going on in the world. And you're not necessarily going to do that in 3 sentences. I think there's the big echo chamber on a lot of social, especially on LinkedIn. But if you really want to provoke thought and generate conversations with key decision makers in a more limited B2B motion, you really can't afford to do anything less than something of substance and depth. And you're just not going to do that if you're focused on the drive-by clickbait stuff.
Yep. Great points. All right, let's jump into story number 3. This is a little bit more of a product thing, and this is directly from your experience at BombBomb's. So take it away. Story number 3.
Sure. We were, like a lot of companies, early stage, we had a really powerful idea. We were getting positive feedback on it. We had some customers, but we didn't have what most people would regard as product market fit. We didn't know the best way to really go to market. What we offer, almost anyone working professionally can benefit from the service that we provide, but you can't go to market that way. You're just not going to get any traction. And so we got a little bit of momentum in a particular vertical. And so we committed to it, like almost all of our discretionary time and money. We continued to take all kinds of different business, but we invested for about 3 years, all of our discretionary time and money into one particular vertical, and ended up picking up a second vertical that works a lot with those folks as well. So this really tight ecosystem here. And we reached a point where, like so many companies, when you're considering, do we go up market, like we were serving SMB, like in really VSB, very small business, and SMB. So most of our big accounts at the time were like, we'd have, 35 or 40 seats inside an 8,000 person company. So we could say that we were doing, upmarket work, but we really weren't. We had like one spot. So it really was like a VSB, SMB thing. And so as we were looking at different ways to grow revenue, as most companies want to, ARR per seat, or average contract value, I guess is another way to express that, is one of the levers that you can look at. And so we initially focused on these people that we got to know very, very well in these 2 particular verticals, and developed, it was like a 2-month program that they could get involved in. And it cost 4 times more than their annual subscription to our software, which we felt like was a little bit of a leap. But we sold out the first class and ended up doing it like 8 or 9 times. I mean, we generated a ton of revenue with that. And for a bootstrapped organization, it was super helpful to launch these events as a marketing team, to launch and deliver the service, because there's huge immediate cash infusion. But you immediately learn, well, now we got to start over and do it again. So we figured out, like, how do we make this recur? And so we started, again, going back into deep relationship with our existing customers to learn more about problems that we could solve within the scope of what we wanted to do as an organization, and developed a completely new product that was about 2.5x each customer's average spend with us. Created a lot of momentum, teased it out for about 4 or 5 months, did a big launch where we invited people onto sessions. Like, if you wanted access to know about the details of the product and have access to buy it, you had to attend one of these live sessions. So it gave us the opportunity to really, I hate the word control, but like kind of control the story, control the narrative, and make sure people truly understood the value. And I'll turn this into a quick B2B tip, truly understood the value before they had access to it and saw the price and everything else. And so turning that, what we learned from the one-time revenue play into a recurring revenue product was a really smart play. But this idea of just letting people make their own decision without having a dramatic influence on how they understand the value. Like, if you leave it exclusively, I think so many people want to go to a self-service motion, even in B2B. And we tell ourselves that, we don't need humans here because humans are expensive and no one wants to talk to a human anyway. I would just suggest that you're giving away the most powerful way to connect with and influence someone else, to help them understand why things are the way they are. Ideally through a discovery, diagnosis, prescription motion. We don't always have that privilege, but if we had just tried to launch this product that was 2.5 to 3 times the price of all these customers' current subscription. And by the way, we launched it to our existing customers first so that we could develop the product and really understand what they truly loved about it beyond our initial research before we went to the market at large. So we knew how to position it as marketers. If you don't give yourself that opportunity to communicate the value, but you try to make your arguments on a landing page, you try to make your arguments in emails, you try to make it clear to people, but by forcing people who already trust you and like you into a closed environment where you can create this conversation, I feel like it was a much more powerful launch as a consequence. And that was a 7-figure launch window for us over like a 3-week window. And that was a dramatic benefit to us as a company, mostly because it was a benefit to our customers.
Yeah. I like that story. I think one thing I want to point out is you made the decision to say, look, let's focus on 1, maybe 2 verticals. And I see so many B2B marketers. It's kind of what I'll call vertical commitment fear, where as soon as you advise someone to focus on 1 or 2 verticals, all they can think about is like, if I do that, I'm just ruling out 90% of the marketplace, which is, of course, yes, that's what you're doing. But what they don't always appreciate is when you do market to just 1 vertical, all your marketing becomes easier and your conversion rates are way, way higher because the introduction into your prospecting and sales process is all about, your story becomes, we understand your pain. We understand how to solve these problems. Here are examples of other customers in the same vertical who've already been through what you've gone through. And I just feel like it really is it's less classical marketing and more true marketing as a service. And I've always found once you make that distinction into a vertical, you're closing faster. People trust you faster. It's the people who know and trust you, you can sell them other things pretty easily because they'll just go, all right, I like your company. I like you individually. Sure, I'll give it a shot. But the people who don't know anything about you, you gotta hit that vertical angle. And I just have always found that that's been way more productive.
I love that observation. And I just want to double down on the fear that these people have, because we've gone through phases of that ourselves. We had, it will get swung back against you. I feel like we established and pioneered this space that has now attracted hundreds of millions of dollars of venture capital. Not that we have any of it, but people would say, oh, they're just for these people or they're just for those people. And of course, at max, when we were fully invested, all of our discretionary time and money, if we were going to pay to sponsor an event, it was in this industry. If we were going to develop content, we do 1 version for them and 1 version for everybody else. It's like a pretty significant commitment. And even at that point, it only reached like 50% of our total inbound flow. Right. So you're going to continue to take business from, if you can serve multiple verticals, you'll continue to take business elsewhere. But your primary message, your lead foot, the way that you're expressing yourself is really in lockstep with these people that you can serve the best, and be prepared to have other competitors try to use that against you. But the core idea that we followed was, let's establish, we can go into any vertical we want in the future whenever we feel prepared to do that. But let's establish a beachhead here that is impenetrable, because nobody else is doing for this industry what we are doing. No one understands this industry the way that we understand them. No one has the depth of relationships in this industry that we have. And so it becomes this kind of beachhead scenario from which you could do what you just suggested, Steve, which is develop more products and services. That's based on the third story I shared, or, launch into other related verticals and help broaden out inside the ecosystem that those people are already operating in, because no one vertical is locked in and of itself. These verticals interact with one another. And as I already said, we picked up a second vertical just as our consequence of a commitment to the one. And so there are multiple ways to go from it, but I can totally understand the sphere of commitment. And I would double down on what you said, Steve.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of it. It's only going to give you more power and more focus.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Good stories. All right. We're going to jump into the next part of the show, which is the get to know deep dive. And you've already mentioned that you did not know that you wanted to do marketing. It just kind of happened. And you shared a little bit about your earlier career on the broadcast side. So when was it that you really kind of, it clicked for you and it said, you know what, marketing is my thing. I like the challenges, the fun of whether it's communicating something or getting someone to buy something. When was it that it hit you like, I think this is my thing?
It was definitely in my first television job, where I was a writer, producer, and editor internally. And it was just ability to take input from multiple sources, process those, distill to essence, like try to understand what is the most interesting, valuable, compelling, remarkable angle to this thing that I'm trying to create awareness or understanding or behavior around, and then turning it into a little thing. And is the creative aspect of it too, because I came in right at the onset of nonlinear editing. Anyone that knows like iMovie or Final Cut Pro or, Adobe Premiere, that didn't exist when I started my career. Not on your laptop or your local machine. You had to buy an array, like a RAID array, to store all the media and all of this other stuff. But it was at the point where you no longer needed someone to run the audio board and someone to run all the source material, and you sit back on the couch as a producer and tell people what you want. You got to just go in there, close the door, and ingest all of your video, all of your audio, your graphics, the narration, the sound effects, et cetera, and create this piece that would emotionally and intellectually move people to some thought or action. And to see, that then the next layer was you start doing it against market research. Not just, the person that you're creating this on behalf of, fills out a creative brief and suggests what they think is important. You ask some follow-up questions and just go off that. Now you're working off market research, which was the best we had, in a more of a B2C motion, kind of generalized observations about the market at large and some of the strategy around that. And then going into the work from the raw market insights to developing the strategy, to then bringing it down to the piece by piece layer and building campaigns across web ads, across print ads, across audio ads, across cable ads. And of course, we had our own massive communication voice as a broadcast entity. And so it was in that first job at the Fox station in Grand Rapids, Michigan, that I was like, this is for me. I love this. It's creative. It's challenging. It's about people. It's the intersection of psychology and communication. It was just, I loved it.
Yeah. There is such a psychological thing with marketing. And I think what I also enjoy about it is there's not a clear answer. And even four different answers may solve the problem. But it's kind of fascinating that as much as there are best practices and tips, everything forward looking is very different. And you still, you're kind of gambling to some extent. You don't really know for sure. You can repeat things sometimes, but if you're looking at a totally new marketplace, it's kind of like, I like the unknown part of it, So I share that with you. Okay. We've talked about all the great things of marketing. I'm going to flip it around on you now. Now, the downside of being a marketer. So imagine yourself, you're going through your inbox or you're getting phone calls and you're just like, you know what? I can't handle this anymore. This marketing approach or this person, they're driving me nuts. What are some things that as a marketer where you're like, I can't handle these fails anymore. Let's just try to abolish them.
I'll share two. One of them I'm sure almost everyone listening can relate to. And I'll share one that's very specific and personal to me because of the nature of my role that maybe some of you will identify with, or it's at least a caution as you go down this road. So, the one thing everyone can identify with is so many people think they can do marketing, right? Because everyone interacts with marketing messages. Everyone watches some video content, whether that's through a streaming service, broadcast, whatever. Everyone interacts with web ads or at least sees them. Everyone sees social media marketing. Everyone is familiar with or reads books. Everyone thinks that they can do marketing because they have some exposure to it, right? And so every individual has to interact with all these things and make decisions around it. And sometimes you make observations around it. Sometimes you talk to other people about it. It's certainly been a cultural component my entire life, is talking about marketing and advertising and, new campaigns and new interactive structures for campaigns and things. And it's not just because I'm in the business. I talk about this with family members who don't have any interest at all in marketing as a profession. And so I think to bottom line, it's everyone thinks they can do marketing because everyone has some familiarity with and interacts with marketing materials and marketing delivery. But marketing is so much more than what you see at the end of it for so many reasons. And I think we'd probably spend 45 minutes just talking about that topic. The one that's personal is I'm a very forward-facing person. I was the only marketer at BombBomb for several years. Every newsletter, every special offer, all of the onboarding webinars, all of the blog content, all of the social. I was producing all of it. My name was on it. And because we're a video organization, my face was on all of it too. And now in an evangelist position, it's even more so, but it's now a decade deep. Hundreds of thousands of people have my personal email address. And by the way, it's just Ethan, ETHAN at BombBomb.com. And I've connected with tons of people on social. And so I am very often the first point of contact when someone has a problem or a question. And so I personally handle, and I actually appreciate the opportunity, but in my weaker moments or on bad days, I'm like, this is the last thing I need is a, customer confusion, customer complaint, whatever, because I take so much of it personally. And so you want to have that level of intimacy. It's a privilege of being in B2B marketing, especially again, with a more limited market size. We don't have that. Like, again, we have I think 90,000 active users right now. And so many of them have access to me. And it's easier to find me than it is to go to the website, to find the contact page and figure the appropriate route. It's like, oh, I know that dude at BombBomb. And so I wind up receiving and either directly responding to or routing a lot of things. And sometimes it feels like a distraction, especially on busy days or days when I'm kind of stressed out or days when I'm still trying to find my own joy or place in that day or in that moment. When it's timed the wrong way and the spirit is wrong and someone's really angry or frustrated, it can really drag me down.
Yeah, I hear you on that. All right, so a couple more questions. The next one is, we'll get tactical here in the marketing tech stack world. Besides BombBomb, of course, what is your favorite tool that just, whether it's for productivity or analytics, what's something that you've been turned on to in the last year or two where you're like, thank God for this tool, I love it?
Oh, last year or two. Well, now you just kind of hem me in a little bit. I have a couple of go-tos. I just want to double down on video messaging. If you are trying to get people to fill out a survey, if you're trying to get people to agree to do a customer interview, if you want people to feel like they matter to you and your organization, stop relying exclusively on faceless typed out text and find a video messaging tool and at least experiment with it. Say thank you, good job, congratulations, I've been thinking about you, thank you for your time. Whatever it can be simple stuff, but this idea of you being present with someone asynchronously is super, super powerful. And we could spend 45 minutes just on marketing use cases, product marketing use cases we could do at least 20 minutes on. Anyway, so that's one. I was going to go to, I guess, since you set BombBomb on the side, and there are a number of providers, by the way. I want to be fair to everybody. I just think more people should be doing this. So if you don't like us or the way we're priced or styled, give someone else a look. But this is worth doing, period. I want it to be normalized behavior. Calendly, have I been using it for more than 2 years? Probably, but I interact with a lot of people online. And this opportunity just to, I think when the office shut down at the onset of the pandemic years ago now, this opportunity to connect with people that I had only known through social media became a thing. And just having a Calendly link or multiple Calendly links for a variety of things is insanely helpful. It's just so productive. I love it.
All right. Awesome.
And it's cheap.
That is true. The efficiency. I mean, I use Calendly for a while now. You got to get good at like blocking out personal time or work time that you don't want access. So I think you've got to really actively manage it. Because sometimes when I started using it, I was like, all right, awesome, 3 new meetings. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to meet then. I'm doing something else. So you got to really guard yourself.
So that's the secondary benefit. Same thing for me. Like I kind of used my calendar like I would use it reasonably well. But once I started opening my calendar up for the podcast and for some of these kind of one-on-one, like learning, get to know you, what's a potential, partnership situation types of meetings, it immediately made me more focused on how I was structuring my day and when I should be blocking my calendar. Yeah. It really brought me to a new level of relationship with my calendar.
Yeah, really. I mean, I got to a point where I could sometimes say for this type of a meeting, I want to do it on Thursday between, 9 in the morning to 1. And if I put a link out there far enough, everyone would kind of neatly follow that path. And I would say, great, I can knock out 4 meetings back to back. And then I would have half a day left. So instead of like spraying your meetings throughout the entire day, when you can do that, it feels like a big win because you're not just back and forth with meeting, no meeting, no meeting. Yeah, it can be really, really, really powerful. All right. So before we head out, I want to thank you for being here today. And I also want you to give a plug for both your book and your podcast. So I want to make sure everyone has access to it. We'll include it in the show notes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Steve. And I'll do a shout out to another podcast as well, because I think it'd be useful for a lot of B2B marketers. So the podcast I host is called the Customer Experience Podcast. It's just at BombBomb.com/podcast or the Customer Experience Podcast and all the podcast places. Wherever you're listening to this, you can also find that. I also love the Marketing Book Podcast. Sometimes I don't read books because I just listen to an hour-long interview with the author of these B2B sales and marketing books. And sometimes I will read a book because of the interview. Other times I will have read the book and now I want to go deeper. So if you like the podcast format, which you obviously do if you're listening at this point to this conversation, and you like books, which is something we already talked about, Marketing Book Podcast by Douglas Burdett is fantastic. And as for the books, the first book that I wrote is called Rehumanize Your Business: How Personal Videos Accelerate Sales and Improve Customer Experience. That one was by Wiley. We released that in spring of 2019. And then the more recent book we did with Fast Company Press, that one is called Human-Centered Communication: A Business Case Against Digital Pollution. That one released again, Fast Company Press in October of 2021. And you can find both of those Amazon or at BombBomb.com/book or anywhere else that you look for books.
Awesome. All right. Thanks everyone for joining. And thank you again, Ethan, for a really insightful show. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Interesting B2B Marketers Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss an episode. If you found value in today's episode, please help grow the podcast by sharing with others and leaving a review. We'll see you next time.